Hello, good morning. So here we are for our Tuesday talk. Hope you are well and warm. It's definitely got quite chilly again recently. So today's talk, we're looking at taking account of our fluctuating energy levels as part of our overall business plan, daily, weekly, monthly schedule. And I know for myself, this has been an ongoing, don't want to say battle, but it's been something I've been refining over time. And I've definitely made lots of mistakes and hopefully able to give you some useful tips based on what I've learned from making mistakes with my own scheduling. So, first of all, just thinking about, I suppose, checking in and just being real about what's reasonable to expect of ourselves. And everybody's circumstances will be individual, as are our own bodies and our own innate energy levels, health, and general capacity. So, some people are high energy, they don't need lots of sleep, and they just seem to be a bit like a Duracell bunny. I know one or two people like that. And I think I always then measured myself against them, thinking, well, if they can do it, if my friend can do it, then why can't I? And it's because I'm not them. My body's different, my energy's different. And the more I tried to copy other people who seemed to be doing all the things all the time, the more I was just really kind of damaging my own health and I guess my own self esteem as well. Because if we're trying to measure up to somebody who's very different to us, comparison often is going to be something that leads to disappointment. So I guess that's the first thing is checking in with yourself about what's reasonable to ask of yourself with your own innate general capacity. And there are things that can vary either within our bodies or within our lifestyle or the phase of life that we're in that can also affect how much time and energy that we have. So, I know that the majority of us here are women, and so something like our menstrual cycle is going to have a big impact in how we feel. There's a natural rise of energy towards ovulation, there's a natural drop of energy as we come towards the bleed phase. So this is like a monthly cyclical energy rising and falling. And so when we have a schedule that gives us the exact same week every week, we're going to have some weeks where that's super easy because we're perhaps around ovulation and that might be a time where you have lots of energy. But then what happens in that week where you're premenstrual or bleeding and you feel heavy and tired and achy, and we have this schedule that's very hard to live up to. So that's one area. And then, of course, as we go through our lives, there may be times where there's pregnancy, there may be times then when you're postnatal, then when you're caring for small children. These are huge things that can massively affect the energy levels that we have and our capacity for being switched on and productive and getting things done. So just checking in with where you are and what's a reasonable level of work, productivity, teaching, what's reasonable to ask of yourselves. And then, of course, beyond that, where I find myself in perimenopause, it's all kinds of changes going on there. And I'm really noticing how it's affecting my energy, my sleep, my ability to concentrate. So all of those sorts of things are going to need a little bit of extra care. And it has meant that I've been shifting the way that I work because I don't I don't operate in the same way as I did in my 20s, and that's fine. I think it's just knowing what we need and adapting to it. And then, of course, I'm aware some people have long-term health concerns of their own. So it might be that you have some kind of autoimmune illness that you live with. There's all kinds of things that also can affect people's energy levels. You might have a condition that is stable and then flares up for a while. So those things to take into account. And then, of course, just bearing in mind that we're probably at some point going to get a passing cold or maybe a chest infection. So, there might be things like that. You might be prone to headaches, or, there might be these other issues that we need to build slack into our schedule to give us some breathing space around some of these issues. So those are all the things to think about, of what are the things that you might need to care for, to factor in for. If you have small children that don't sleep brilliantly, or if you know that you don't always sleep well, then maybe you need to factor in some downtime to catch up on some sleep or to get some rest. So I guess one of my biggest mistakes that I kept repeating in different ways is to have a schedule that works fantastically on paper. So I would very carefully draw out a week and put in all the things that were fixed obligations, and then think about things like, my travel time and meal times, and when I was going to do some exercise, and then time for my admin. And it was brilliant. It absolutely worked perfectly, other than I couldn't physically do it all the time. So being really careful about when you're planning. So what I had managed to do was fill, back to back every single day, filling all the gaps. It's like, oh, I've got a gap there. Well, I could just write a blog in that gap. And, oh, I've got a gap here. So that's where I could do a newsletter. It's like, oh, there's a gap here that I could see a private client. So all the gaps were full of useful thing, and some of the gaps were filled with meal times or maybe going to get a massage. So there was self-care in there. So I'd kind of convinced myself that I had accounted for all these things. But there was no slack in there, and everything is so full that if I had a day where I was unwell and I had to miss a whole day of that schedule, I was then immediately behind, and there's no catch-up time either, and it was just creating stress. And I think I'd been in that cycle a few times of like trying to rearrange things to work better. But actually I had missed the fact that you just need time in your diary that doesn't have anything in it, that where you can be responsive to where you are on the day. And the other thing around creating a schedule as well, which is kind of similar, is be really mindful that you don't create your schedule on your best days. And I think there's a tendency to do that because when we're on our days of high energy and we're enthusiastic and we're in a good mood and we're getting loads of things done, that's the sort of frame of mind where you might be inspired to go, right, now I have a vision and I have energy and I've sussed it, right, I'm going to work out my schedule. And you can be working out your schedule based on the energy you have on that day because it all feels possible. And maybe you've just done a day like that. And again, this is what I've done as well, is go, oh, yeah, no, this works because I just did this today. That's a system that works really well. And it works well if I have the energy that day. But if I've just done a day that is pretty relentless, it's not going to be repeatable day after day, week after week. And so this is what we need to think about when we're sort of creating a schedule, is not only what's possible in a day, but then what's possible in a week, and then what's possible week after week after week. And again, this is where I'd made mistakes before, where a very busy day was possible and I would feel fine, but it's not something I could then do 3 or 4 days in a row. Or not go straight into, if I've had a very busy day finishing late, not going straight into a very busy day starting early, for example. And so now what I tend to do is have some days that are quite intense and some days that are quite gentle. That gives me flexibility to have the catch up time, and it will vary according to what works best for you. You might want all your days to be fairly consistent and not overly demanding. I think I quite like to have days that are quite intense and feel really productive, and then days where I can kind of switch off and be more restful and maybe more contemplative and sort of gather together ideas and inspiration and then have another burst of work. So it really depends on you. There's no fixed right or wrong way of doing this. But it's really getting to know yourself. And as I mentioned, getting to know, or really being realistic about what you could ask of yourself, what's a reasonable expectation, because sometimes, we can get caught in a negative, sort of like negative self-talk where we're asking ourselves completely unreasonable things and then telling ourselves how awful we are for not living up to it. And when you say it like that, of course, it sounds ridiculous. But these things sort of sneak in, this way of, oh, well, I should be teaching this number of classes and I should be doing, all this social media content, and I should be doing all of whatever, I should be doing extra reading, extra research, extra training, extra everything. And not really stopping to think, is this reasonable to ask ourselves to do all of these things? And I guess that's why at the beginning of the year we were looking at goal setting, because these things might be necessary and needed, but we need to plan on a bigger scale, and schedule things in a way that's achievable. So we're not going to be massively overloading ourselves and then having to drop things because we just can't keep spinning all the plates. So thinking about this long-term scheduling, and if you do want to do some, like a bigger project, again, how is that going to fit into your schedule? So we need to look at either having regular downtime, or you might like to work seasonally. I know some teachers only teach during school time, and so the school holidays they're not running their classes, and so there are natural breaks there where you could bring in another project if you wanted to do some writing, if you wanted to do some training, if you wanted to do some research or run a retreat or do something that's different from your weekly. Again, thinking about where can you create space in your schedule so there's this spaciousness overall, that you have room to breathe, to think, to rest, to recover, so that we can just keep doing the things that we do. So I'm just looking at some of the notes I made for myself. So a few things that you can do on a weekly basis is to account for the fact that some days you may not be feeling great and you might not be able to predict when those days are. So that can be difficult in terms of scheduling. And certainly this is something I'm really noticing with my perimenopause, because I never know when my cycle's coming or if I'm going to have another one or how I'm going to feel on any given day. So on top of factoring in time that's just empty, so if I need to do nothing, I can, but if I'm energized and feel inspired, then I can do that too. But for example, we could, where we're scheduling in, say, a daily practice for ourselves, it might be our daily yoga practice, keep that in your schedule as a boundaried time, but then you can change what you practice according to what you need. So sometimes I might feel like I want to do a strong practice and I'm doing sun salutes and strong arm work and, really doing a strong asana practice because it feels the right thing for me. And then other days, it might be that I just lay on the mat and do a yoga nidra. So it's still keeping to my schedule, but having these things that are very open-ended so you can adjust them to what works for you. So having some things like that can be really useful. So you're maintaining your schedule, but you have a variety of things you can do within these little containers that you have in your diary. And the other thing that's been I think I had a real resistance to, but I think it's an important thing as well, is showing up to class as you are. And I think sometimes we might feel that we have to be a certain way or have a certain energy level to be teaching. And sometimes in life, it's difficult to have that all the time. And so I guess for me, it's been a process of being a little bit braver and being a little more authentic in showing up as I am. Now, obviously, we're always doing the work on ourselves so that we bring a good vibe into class. But sometimes I know my energy's lower and I feel like this hormonal headache coming on, and I'm still teaching. And so rather than just pretending that I'm all energetic and come on everybody, and that maybe the vibe of the class is just a little more grounded and a little slower, and being honest about where I'm at and teaching accordingly. And I find that students really respond to that we're not pretending anything. We're still being professional, we're still holding space for people, but just at the same time acknowledging that I'm not super high energy right now. And that doesn't mean that you can't teach and you can't teach well, but it's being more skillful and adaptable in our teaching so that we don't create more tension and stress within ourselves and push ourselves too hard for that day. So on those days of being lower energy, or the days that if you happen to have a busy teaching day and then that's a day that you've started your period, then maybe that's a day where you don't demonstrate very much. You teach in a slightly different way, and maybe letting the class know where you're at and say, well, this is where I'm at today. And it's also a way of teaching people, sort of like a meta level of teaching, that actually being a good yoga practitioner is honoring your body and honoring your energy, and that you don't push through and pretend something's not happening when it is. So that's another way that you can make your schedule more manageable, is that your classes can vary according to where your energy is. And I don't think that this detracts anything from your teaching or means that you're shortchanging your students. And if you tend to teach strong vinyasa flow classes, you could still teach that. You just don't demonstrate so much. And find other ways of teaching in the way that I know teachers have done if they happen to have an injury. And it's interesting, isn't it, that we probably wouldn't feel embarrassed about going into class and saying, oh, I twisted my ankle, I stepped badly off a curb, and so I can't demonstrate today, but I'm here, I'm with you, I'm teaching. And we might not feel so embarrassed about that, but sometimes we might have that judgment on ourselves around where we might be in terms of our menstrual cycle or menopause, or just our energy levels, to say, actually, my energy is really low, so I'm not demonstrating so much today. But if your energy's up, I'm going to guide you through a strong practice if that's what you want. So kind of being kind to ourselves in that way and not draining ourselves even further. Because what I've noticed for myself is if I do kind of try to push through and put on a brave face and pretend that I'm feeling super bouncy and high energy, at some point I crash quite hard, and then I lose a couple of days in a migraine or in something that my body will make me stop. And so thankfully, that's a very rare occurrence these days, because I've learned better how to manage my energy. So on those days where you happen to be tired, if you have small children and they've had a bad night and you haven't slept that night, take easier options, be gentle with yourself. Those might be the days where you do get a takeaway lunch rather than getting up early and making it for yourself. Like having some of those things that just make life a little bit easier on those days that you're tired. Don't say yes to anything extra. Like, do the minimum that you need to fulfill your obligations, to still be professional. And then everything else, like I say, take easier options. Like if you normally cycle to class, then maybe get the bus that day, or look at ways that you can just save a little bit of energy, be gentle with yourself, not do anything too extra. And I guess this then leads into kind of some of the practical things that we can do to alleviate the anxiety we might have about taking it easy on some days, because we have ongoing things that we need to do for our business. And so I'm really into the idea of batch working. So on the days that you have energy, you get lots done. And so then the days that you don't have so much energy, it doesn't matter because you've already done a load of work. So this can work really well if you use social media and you want to keep up regular content, that maybe schedule some time in your diary that once a month you have a whole day where you batch all the content for the coming month and schedule it. So it's already done, written, it's in the program, it will be automatically published. So at least you have, say, one or two things a week that are already done and scheduled. And then you can add some extra things kind of as you go along. As you see something that inspires you, you can do a couple of extra posts if you want to. again, if you are somebody who has a blog, what you might like to do is, again, maybe set aside a day where you sit down and you write. You could say write 4 blogs, and then that, if you do one a month, you've got 4 months worth of blogs there written, and then all you have to do is publish them. You could even schedule them to be published. So those days where we feel really inspired and energized, we can get lots done and be ahead of ourselves. And and this is where sometimes it is worth paying a little bit extra for some of these services, where we can have scheduling in. Again, it was something I resisted for quite a long time, because I think, oh, why am I paying extra for something where I can do it for free? But sometimes if the free version means that you have to go in manually and do things every day, then those days where you feel a bit wiped out and you just need to stop for a bit, you still have to go in and manually do these things because they're not happening automatically. So thinking long term, planning ahead, planning in time off, downtime, and also this accounts for when we're thinking about filling the schedule, when you have got time off. So you might, for example, be really disciplined about not working on the weekends, and your weekends are always your downtime. Be mindful also that you don't pack every single weekend. And again, I know I've done something like that where I'm looking ahead and going, oh, I've got a free weekend then, so I can go visit a friend. And oh, that weekend's free, so I can book these things in. And then all the weekends are booked. And then it might be that I have a really busy, hectic week, and what I really need is just to lie around and do nothing for a whole weekend. But if I've already booked to go somewhere or have people come stay with me or do all these things, then there isn't the recovery time. So I think that's I guess, as takeaway points, first stage, very simply, avoid packing your diary from morning till night, 7 days a week, even when it's with nice things and not necessarily work things. Give yourself empty space in your diary, which is the slack in your system, where if you do have to push through 1 or 2 days because of obligations that you have, that you've got a couple of days coming up that are empty, where you can completely self-care and get yourself on an even keel, that you can restore yourself. And if in that empty time you feel great, then you can be spontaneous and do whatever you feel like that day. But it's giving yourself the space for recovery. It's also looking at scheduling. So if you can get really organized, and for some of the admin stuff that you do, if you can just have a dedicated time where you can batch several things in one go, it's usually more efficient. And then you've got 90% of the work done, and then maybe the last little bit it's very easy to do, or you could complete the whole thing and fully schedule it, and then you can go on holiday knowing that your blog's going to be published while you're away, that your social media is going to be posting automatically while you're away, that your newsletter will go out. Like, all of these things are done and dusted, so you get to have the time off that you need. So I hope those have been some useful ideas for you. So giving yourself space in your diary, batching and scheduling as much as you can, and then showing up as you are in your classes and acknowledging where you are with your students, and giving yourself permission to take it easy on days where you're not high energy. And then the days where you are high energy, well, then you can teach in a different way. Um, so if any of that has given you some inspiration of some ways that you can make life easier for yourself, be lovely to hear in the comments below. And if you have anything that you would like to share about this, then do start a chat within the group. It's really lovely to have a bit of community conversation going on where we can support each other and also share other practical tips and ideas of what works for you. So maybe you found a way to schedule stuff that works really well for you. Maybe there's a program you use that you think's really user friendly and very affordable. Like if you've got any tips like that or any practices that you do that you found makes your life easier, that accounts for your ups and downs of your energy, then that's a lovely thing to share in the group. So we are at 10:30, so we'll wrap up for today, and I'll look forward to seeing you same time next week. Have a great week.